Good to go?
Take it away, Josh.
All right. So I'm going to talk about software applications with Ash. Question: what could the future of software look like? Basically, with the advent of LLMs and using Ash, a data-driven approach to building and declaring our applications, we can basically build a lot smarter platforms than we have been able to before. So what if your software could, and I'm just going to minimize this so that my slides are not in the way. It'd be cool if Zoom just made it go out of the way. All right, how's that? Better? So what if your software could talk to you and answer your questions and let you do things with it? Because really, we have applications now, we have user interfaces and application hierarchies and navigations. We never asked for all of that stuff. And what we really want to do is answer questions and interact with the world through our system. And so, yes, there might be some visual pieces, but really we should be able to talk to our apps. And they're static right now, and we have to do a lot of work to make them as they are in a static way. But what if they were adaptable and dynamic, and we could adapt that UI based on the questions that were asked or user behavior, different preferences that we learn from different users? And what if an application could actually, if it knows enough about itself, answer user support queries automatically? I mean, it's probably not going to be able to answer all questions. Humans still need to be in the loop, but the app could do first-tier support, sort of interactive help rather than just reams of documentation you need to read. Anyone who's played with it, modern LLMs will know that that is pretty approachable. What if you could have a living documentation that is always up to date for your application? If we know enough about our system, we can do that. And what if we can visualize the application architecture as we're building it? So think of a missing piece of the software puzzle where you have an interface for stakeholders, builders, developers. How do you interact with the thing that you're building as you're building it? How do you understand it? How do you document it, visualize it, figure out if it's the right thing that you've designed or not? What if your software could do that? What if we could add new features and automatically check that we've got decent test suites so it keeps working how we expect? And what if we could translate the app into any language on the fly? LLMs are really good at that, so we should be able to do that. May not be perfect, but it would certainly enable accessibility without a hell of a lot of work. So what could help us do that? Ash. I'm going to tell you why. Ash knows everything about your application. Not everything, but it knows a lot more things than what we traditionally do with code because it's a data-driven approach. And remember that Phoenix made a very big deal in its early days around version 1.3, I think it was. You may have missed that, but it made a big deal about Phoenix not being your application. Phoenix is a web framework. It tried to not have any super strong opinions, or it tried to not have any opinions about your code and how it was structured for your application that wasn't the web part. And it was really trying to concentrate on being the web app. Now, that said, when you do a Phoenix new, mix Phoenix new, and you generate a new Phoenix application, you do get some opinions about how to structure your applications, and you can generate sort of productions. It largely boils down to you've got bounded context, a folder for your application that isn't your web UI. You've got folders for bounded contexts, and they introduced the idea of contexts, which were just domain-driven design bounded contexts. And then inside those folders, you created basically modules with functions that called Ecto. And largely that was the extent of the Phoenix opinions. Ash aims to replace that sort of loose set of non-opinions with really quite strong opinions. And I think if you haven't seen this slide before, we're things work in this red layer here, in the middle. And we declare our domain, we declare our application, we declare what it does using DSLs, and then try to derive everything else from that structure. So there's a data structure in the middle. We'll see that in a second, but everything else is derived from that. And yeah, once you have the DSL declared, we'll see some better examples in a second, but you're declaring a module, writing stuff in Ash DSLs. The big idea is that that gets turned into one big data structure that represents all of your application and domain. And the point is, it's just simple data structures. They could be in any language or form, as long as they're structured the same way. So it doesn't have to be Elixir. And once you have that data structure, it is primarily data. And look, there are bits where you can write your own modules and write your own code if Ash doesn't support what you need to do directly. You can write your own extensions. You can add modules that do custom code. That won't necessarily appear in the data structure, but for 90+% of your application, you'll have the data, which is the important part. And then from that data structure, you can derive, introspecting the data structure, derive all sorts of things. So we can generate APIs, generate database structures, do work at the database layer or not. See an example of that shortly. So what else have we got? Have you seen this problem? You want to build a web app or any application, and you want to build top of the waterline, the iceberg, but underneath the waterline, you've got all the things that are table stakes for building a modern web application, and it's a lot. So really all of the innovation and differentiation and the core IP and the real asset and the high value stuff is above the waterline. Below the waterline is super commodity problems that have been solved before. Clients don't really care about them. Customers don't perceive that as high value at all. And it's largely just table stakes. There's a lot of things below the waterline, and it's, time spent down there is basically waste. And this is a very non-exhaustive kind of old list. Those are the kinds of things that I would argue should be in your application on day zero, and I think can be. And, debatable on exactly how much is below the waterline, but let's be honest, it's a lot. So again, Ash helps us solve those problems as well. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel, is the basic premise. And we're doing that through data. So what is it? I've been trying to explain this stuff for about 2 years now. It's hard to explain. I'll try and break it down. We say it's a declarative application framework. Even that's sort of two things. It's an application framework where concentrating on the application and the data below it, but really it's the middle bit where your domain logic and your business logic sits. And we declare it through DSLs, and that turns into data. So that's the important part about it being declarative. It's resource-based, so those are the nouns in your system. It's pretty common. I mean, you could think of that as resource-based in REST style or what have you, but basically think of them as the nouns in your system. It's absolutely agnostic of UI layer or data layers. We don't really care what the data layer is. We allow you to switch them, and we certainly don't care how you present your application to users. That stuff is completely up to you, how you do that. We've got some helpers, but we don't have strong opinions. One of the big, annoying, repetitive questions is, should I use Phoenix or Ash? And the answer is both. Use both. There is some overlap because Phoenix, even though it says it doesn't have opinions about how you build your app, it kind of does from the generators. It sort of has some loose opinions, but it really tries not to. But that's what a Phoenix app looks like. It is, by nature, it has to have some application layer in there. But yeah, remember, it is completely agnostic for those UI layers, and it may not even have one at all. But typically, you would want to have some way for your users to interact with your system. So we're really focused on that middle part, the red bit in the 3-tier architecture. We want to model your domain and business logic, and we want to keep that in one place. because modern systems are, I don't really know how CIOs, CTOs, CISOs sleep at night, because if you've taken a microservice approach or you have lots of SaaS vendors, you've basically smeared your assets as a company across multiple vendors in multiple places, across multiple network boundaries. And you couldn't really point to where your core IP or your asset really lives. And you couldn't have it and own it and package it up. Ash tries to solve that problem by, in Elixir, we're kind of team monolith, modular monolith, and Flame, things like Flame allow us to do serverless and Lambda elastic workloads. There's some great talks that were ElixirConf on that stuff, and that's pretty exciting. But yeah, we want to keep all our bits together in one code base if we can possibly help it. So the other thing is Ash is all about DSLs all the way down. So we try to do as much as we can in the DSLs, because if you do it in a DSL, you can get the data structures out the bat. And then you can introspect those data structures. Just said that. And then, yeah, once you've got that data structure, derive and generate lots of other things. Really, all that you'll see now and all that you can see in the Ash ecosystem is just examples, initial examples of what you can do, because really the sky's the limit. And that's like that derivation part is kind of like the self-awareness, because you've got it all in data. The app can know about itself because of that data structure. So I've talked about this stuff. Ash is your application. It's key to remember. We can use them both. Phoenix is typically the web layer, UI layer for our Ash applications, but not mandatory. Seeing this, I'll move on. So here are some examples of what Ash looks like if you haven't seen it. So this is a resource module for user. We declare that we're a resource. We've got a Postgres data layer. We're using GraphQL in this instance to expose it as GraphQL, although there isn't a GraphQL section there, so ignore that. And it's just, pretty easy to read. Even semi-technical people can read these things. Look kind of like early Rails, which is where this idea sort of started. The introspection is super important. So you get a quite large with helpers. So you can see there, we've got Ash.Resource info attributes for a resource, gives you a way to navigate the data structure, but under the cover, it's just one big giant data structure with some metadata in there. And so if we want to look at the relationships, we can do that. If we want to look at, what's the user table that we're using for AshPostgres, it's called users. We declared that previously. One nice thing that falls out of this is we can auto-generate data migrations. So remember the data structure, we can take a snapshot of our resources. That data structure gets turned into JSON because it's easy to diff. And we store those away and check them into our code base. So when you change your resources, you can get the snapshot of the diff. And when we go to generate a migration, it just does a diff between the resource states and generates the appropriate migration, which is pretty awesome, because who likes writing data migrations? Not me. So that's pretty powerful, but that's just an idea that falls out of everything's data. So, even simple data migrations are pretty annoying. And so having them written for you is pretty great. So the other thing that falls out of modeling everything is data is that there is a portable expression. It's a macro here, but it's a sort of way of having portable expressions defined in Elixir macros. It's a bit like Ecto, but it allows us to declare our expressions, and they can get quite complex. It doesn't let you do everything, but if you can write an expression, and I won't go into the details here, but if you can write an expression, what we can do is either do the work in Elixir land in your application, or if possible, in the data layer that you're using for that resource that has the expression defined in it, we can do smart stuff down in the database layer. So if we can do the work in some way better than our application, then we can do that. And that means you've got portable business logic. Now, again, it's not going to cover everything, but it's pretty powerful and probably worth its own talk. But the main thing is that, depending on the data layer you choose, you can do the work in the data layer where that makes sense, or have it, if you have a data layer that's just CSV or ETS, which doesn't have any expression language, you can do the work up in the application layer. So that's pretty powerful. And I don't think we've taken that, to the full extreme. So you can test that stuff pretty easily. It's pretty pure. And yeah, make it happen where it makes sense. Now, we talked about resources as the nouns, and we looked at relationship sections where you define the relationships. But the big idea of Ash is that we model the entire thing, including the verbs. So we're modeling actions, which are the things that you can do to your application. And this is pretty important if you want to generate interfaces for how you interact with the application. And we'll see a pretty powerful example at the end. So yeah, we're modeling, how those functions work. So this is what you define as functions, but we're declaring it as a DSL, so it's data driven. Because introspecting code, which could be in any form, is really hard. And so these can get pretty complicated. We can accept arguments, passwords, talk about validations and all that kind of jazz, and talk about what happens when we have that, hashing passwords, etc. So these can get pretty big. And we can also expose those externally through APIs. So a action for registering an email can also be exposed out with the user type and a create user migration mutation in GraphQL or JSON API, either or. I mean, it's nice to have the ability to basically auto-generate and expose your application through any API that you would like. And GraphQL is great, but it's probably not the best choice. I mean, it's a great choice for being the API for your internal clients and your application. But it's turned out not that great because you have to do a lot of defensive work for an external API for users that could send you any kinds of queries at any level of complexity. They could do all kinds of DDoS attacks and complexity attacks, and you kind of have to defend against that. Even if it's not malicious, someone unintentionally may uncover, slow performance because you didn't handle a particular N+1 properly or what have you. And people often complain that GraphQL is slow, but no, how you implemented it is actually slow. But it's difficult to capture when you don't know what queries are coming in, and it is flexible, what you really need to handle, which is why REST is kind of known. You can just curl and say, give me the endpoint for this, and you get all the data. It's kind of easy to work with from an external point of view. So having both is really nice. GraphQL for internal, JSON API or REST for external applications, clients. Code interfaces are cool because they actually write your functions for your domain contexts for you. And in most cases, you don't need to write anything because the data declares everything you need to know about it. And so, yeah, not writing code when you don't have to, it's pretty nice. Data for the win. So this is an example of all the types you get and the result you get from GraphQL generation. This is what it looks like when you generate APIs. Things like documentation automatically flows through. All of your types automatically flow through. You don't have to do much when you generate this stuff. And you've declared everything appropriately on your resources. So do document your resources and all the attributes and so forth, and it'll flow through to the external APIs, which is pretty great, saves time. And you get one single view of what your application does and how it's documented. Yeah, this is the functions that are generated. So user register, when you say code interface and you describe the arguments come in, we can just generate the function that makes the calls to Ash to go do the thing. And it's pretty great. I was talking about in the what if you could, we already can do this as a mixed task, generate mermaid diagrams of our resources and our domains and our applications already. It's not a great diagram. We haven't really updated this. It doesn't, it's difficult to get the one-to-many stuff because the relationships aren't all double-sided necessarily. But you can imagine that you could take this further and, have any kind of representation, because all we did was just introspect the resources and generate mermaid. So you can generate any form you like. And that's all of the information from all of the actions and the arguments that they take and so forth. So you're getting a full picture of what your domain really looks like. We can get security insights as well. I didn't have a code piece for that, but you can declare your authorization rules, your permissions for your resources. And so we can zoom into that picture because you can't read it. But yeah, I think Zach and I were sitting at a conference and I said, hey, those permissions are kind of hard to read. What if we had a flow chart or some visualization? And in half an hour, he'd knocked up this mermaid chart to describe to potentially a security auditor or, a colleague trying to reason about, well, who can see what and what rules are being declared here. And you can imagine that, it doesn't have to be this form. It can be any form you like. You could have, tables of rules, or Barnabas is online. He's written a Ash RBAC tool, which is sort of a nice RBAC role-based access control abstraction over the top of the base Ash permissioning system. So because that's all data, we can introspect, make auditing, security, and reasoning about it much easier. We can also generate entire admin UIs. Now, this is kind of clunky, but we've used it on various projects as a placeholder. So while we're building the app, this is kind of ugly, but it works and it lets you interact with your system and your data and do all the actions and do all the, enter all the attributes that you have on your resources, navigate the relationships and so forth. And though it's clunky, it works and it lets you do anything that you've declared to your app. And clients kind of fall in love with it. I didn't expect that they would. It is very clunky, but once they get used to using it, they tend to want to not build the thing that should replace this because it's good enough for a super admin interface. And so, yeah, there's some work to do to fix this up and make it better, but it's very usable and workable right now. You can even impersonate in the right-hand corner any tenant or any user, and you've got user impersonation, which is pretty nice to have out of the box. And yeah, I think we could do better at this, but it's pretty workable right now. It's the admin UI you don't need to build, and so you can interact with your system. So I've shown all this stuff multiple times, but you get the idea. Is once we've got this data structure, we can really generate anything you like. All of things I've shown you are just kind of examples. So yeah, lots of things are possible. Now, I'm going to show you, Zach did a demo at the end of his talk at Elixir Conf. It's not public yet, so I've got to go find the thing that I have access to. They did it in Vito, so it's not actually available to everyone yet. But it's important enough, and it's a very short demo. It's important enough that, yeah, it's good to see what we can do talking to our app. Yellow, if you see it, there it is. I think it's about here. Mike, you might want to just do a sound check for the recording.
Yeah, so we've still got your Keynote window.
Yeah. Okay.
You want to switch over to your browser?
I mean, I don't want to, but I will. Probably have to stop the share. Start sharing it. I'll probably just do my screen.
And yeah, just check the option to share your computer sound.
Where's that? Is that in video?
think it's
What-
when you, yeah, in the share menu, if you click advanced sharing options. No, sorry, not there.
No? Anyone? Do you know where the audio is?
I was just using it earlier today.
Yeah.
I
There we
think
go.
it's when you start sharing, you have to tick the box. if I'm not
It's here.
mistaken.
Oh, what? By Zoom. Thanks, Zoom. All right. How's that? I'm not even sure if that's the right video. Let me try this.
Hours
Can you hear
because
that?
this is Hash AI. All right. So
Mike, can you hear that?
Yep, audio is good.
All right.
we have a little app.
Not yet, you don't?
It's called Twitter. Ours is actually a little app. All right. So we've got 2 users in our Twitter app, right? This is just a little thing that ensures that they exist. Can you not see it? All right. I will fix. It's called Twitter, okay? We're taking it back. Okay, so we've got a little file here that ensures there's 2 users that exist when we start up our shell. And it's a really simple app, right? So we've got users that you can create a user, you can read a user. They've got a unique username. You're welcome. So you also have tweets, of course. Tweets are really simple. You can create a tweet. The one thing that we have that we've had an example for here, let me comment this out for now, is you can create a tweet, but you can also say if it's private or not, right? So that's the entirety of this little app. Doesn't do much. But I wanted to put my money where my mouth was when I said we can derive really powerful things just with the definitions of your application, right? So now we have a package. It's called Ash AI. And I can say ashai.chat. And I'm going to say with Zach. All right, so now I'm chatting with my app, right? And I could say something like, what can I do? All right, it says, well, as a user, you can perform several actions related to your Twitter account. That wasn't the cool part. I actually want to do stuff. Can you create a tweet for me that is about how cool AI is? Hey, look, it made a tweet. AI is incredibly cool, from everyday applications to groundbreaking discoveries, right? So this is actually using our application. And the way I can tell it how to do that is because I know what the application does. I can lift the actions to JSON schemas. We already have that tooling for JSON API. It already exists. Why does this take 2 hours? Because this is how this pattern actually plays out at, when you extend it like this. And I can even do things like, can you please write a tweet that contradicts my last tweet? So this is going to run it. I mean, if it does it, we don't really know what it's going to do, right? But what it should do is it should say, well, I need to know what their last tweet was. Look, orders by inserted at limit 2, and now it's going to contradict my last tweet. What's really important about this pattern is when you build on top of an application layer, you're not chatting with your database, you're chatting with your application, is if I go over here and I actually say, well, hey, tell you what, these policies say, hey, anybody can create a tweet, but if you're reading a tweet, you're only allowed to do it if it's not private or if it's a tweet that you made, right? So let's go ahead and enable this, enable these policies. All right, and I will reload this. And I'm going to make a tweet from me, make a private tweet about how cool Jose is. All right, we're inserting a private tweet. Look, there we go. And now let's go ahead and exit this. And I'm going to do this as Jose. And I'm going, yeah, no contradicting that, yes. All right, and so from here I can say, what tweets has Zach Daniel made? So what you'll see is I'm going to get a user with that username. It likes to do that for some reason. And it's going to say, oh, there is no, oh, it's Zach. Right. All right, because reasons. What tweets has Zach made? All right, it's going to find me. And the authorization policies automatically restricted the data access that your robot had to the things it was allowed to see. So you can actually just slap this onto your website and not worry, like, is this going to expose some data that it wasn't supposed to see? And these are the kinds of things that we can build with declarative design. Thank you.
Stop the video. So
the AI basically prompted with the metadata, the Ash metadata.
yeah.
Yes.
So you get the data, you can basically, we can look at the code. It's only it's maybe 500 lines. And he did knock it up after quite a few old fashions at the bar late at night in a couple of hours. And so, yeah, it's a small example of what's possible once you put your app into this form. And it's a sort of a preview of what's possible. Did I have any more slides? I don't remember. So I do. So yeah, what are we building with this stuff? A bunch. So yeah, ERP systems. The bigger the system, really, the better this data-driven approach is, because you don't have to do quite so much work. And you standardize everything. So no matter where you slice the cake, you get the same slice all the way through your system. And without such a set of tooling that you would probably otherwise have to build yourself. And certainly lots of people for big systems have built something like this, a poorly specified half-baked implementation of Ash. Yeah, the bigger the app, the more you get out of it, because you standardize across everywhere. And if you want to make cross-cutting changes, you can do so. So lots of things being built with it. We haven't, smoothed off a lot of rough edges over the last couple of years, but I don't think we've found the limits of what this can do, because whenever we hit a limitation, we can write code the old-fashioned way. We can write an extension to do the bits that we can't declare right now, and so forth. And if you really have to, you can do it not in Ash at all and do it the old-fashioned Phoenix way with functions. But you don't get all the benefits, but you can escape hatch that way. So this is a bit of a preview of the next talk. Igniter is under the Ash project umbrella, but it is not really anything to do with Ash at all. It's AST patching generators that are modular and composable for Elixir code. And I think I probably won't spoil what Zach's going to show, but this is the kind of thing that you can do now. You can create new projects, and instead of doing what is arguably, with a Phoenix generator, you have to say no HTML, no live, no ecto. It's a subtractive idea, because you're going to get everything whether you want it or not, unless you specify otherwise. This is a additive composable patcher. So the idea is you start with as little as possible and add just the bits you need, because you can always add more, because you've got the ability to search for places in the AST to patch code and then add that code or remove it. And if you can't do it, it'll tell you what to do if it can't find the right place to do it for whatever reason. This was up next, but it's actually being done. I don't think Auth0 is done, but I think Google and Magic Link are now done as of this week, which is pretty exciting, because Ash authentication was, I guess, one of the big ideas of Ash was you're able to, with this standardized data structure and DSL language, you can create bigger parts of the application, because you know the structure of the thing that you're attaching it to, i.e. the data structure. And so it's easy to, build bigger pieces of the application. So authentication was one example of doing that. And you can imagine other examples of bigger parts of applications that you want to shove together, like CRMs or CMSs. CRM pops up in a lot of different applications. You generally want to manage customers or users or what have you. And the list of things on the iceberg slide, you know, we generally want to do all that stuff. We want to glue things out of bigger chunks because libraries and functions aren't quite enough. This basically is there. I think it's a pretty early version, but this allows you to introspect a Postgres schema and generate resources from that, which is basically what Hazuro does. Like they started off by taking a Postgres schema and generating a GraphQL API. But this allows you to do that, but for Ash, and then you can generate your GraphQL from that. But you also have places to put your business logic, which Hazuro does not have. What else is coming? There's a book. So that's pretty exciting. This is nearly in beta. I am told that there should be a beta out this year, which is very exciting. Rebecca's working really hard on that. If you want to review it, let me know. I think we're still looking for reviewers. But yeah, really excited to have a book. Here are some QR codes for the website. I don't know what the middle thing is because Zoom's in the way. And there's Discord as well if you want to chat about Ash and get help. I think that's it. Thank you.